Alright, what is up? LucidWorks, it's Cordless here. Today I'm going to run you through getting Tensorflow running on Google Cloud. So previously I've done a video on how you can get a $300 credit on Google Cloud. And so if you go over to Google Cloud and sign up with a new account, they will give you a $300 credit which you can burn on instances. So previously I did a Fusion instance starter, so it's a little script you fire up in the console inside of Google Cloud. So if you're not familiar with Google Cloud's console, it's opened by going into the Google Cloud platform. In this case we're going to be starting VMs, so you'll go to the VM instances and you'll click on this little command prompt up here, and what will happen is it'll pop this open down below. Now what I've done is I've checked out a copy of a repo that we have called streams, and inside of that is a directory called scripts, and inside that directory contains the start TensorFlow script that we're going to use today to start TensorFlow on Google. Again, when you start these things, it's not going to cost you much. If this is a 4-core instance, not a ton of memory, and what it'll do is it'll start in preemptible mode, which means it'll shut off after a while. And if you have that $300 credit on Google, it's not going to really charge you much. It's probably about $1 a day. So at most it's going to cost you $1 because it will shut off in 24 hours. So to get TensorFlow running, you're just going to do a start TensorFlow. I think this should work. And up at the top is eventually it will pop up in there that that instance is running. The instances that you see here right now are my Kubernetes cluster, so you're not going to have those running in there. You might have a Fusion instance in there, maybe if you've started that before on Google Cloud, it might still be in there. You can delete that if you want to. It just keeps it around, the hard drive around, in case you want to restart it. So after a little bit of time, what it's going to do is it's going to pop up and it's going to tell you where the URL is for accessing TensorFlow. And so right now what it's doing behind the scenes is running a script provisioning the server now that it's started, and you can see it running here. And what you want to do is click on this guy, and then you're going to scroll down here and you're going to go to serial port so you can get the console output and you can kind of see what it's doing. So you can sit here and refresh this periodically. You'll notice below here I got an error that says that the firewall entry was already created, and that's because I already ran the script earlier. But the first time you run through this, it's going to open up port 8888, and it's not going to delete it when you shut that off. So just keep that in mind. It's going to make a permanent firewall rule for 8888. So I'm just going to kind of hang out and wait for this thing to refresh. Okay, so now we have TensorFlow running. It's running through a piece of software called Jupyter, which allows you to create notebooks and share them. And what we need from TensorFlow actually is this token. And the token will be used when you access this URL, which I've already pulled up here. And I'm just going to hit refresh on that. And then it's going to ask me for the token. And I'm going to paste in the token and click on Login. Alright, so now what it's doing is it's showing me a directory listing of the examples tutorial, Deep Dream tutorial. So I'm just going to click on that and load it. And this loads up, and this is sort of interesting because it's actually showing you Python. And what you do is you click inside of these Python scripts, snippets, and then you hit Shift and then Enter. And then what happens is it runs it. So it ran that, and there were no errors. So that means that it loaded these libraries and loaded up TensorFlow normally. And then what we're going to do is we're going to download the inception model. Now this is actually the weights of the TensorFlow node graphs that are being built. And it's going to load those up. So this has already been trained on images. So it's a data set that technically has images in it, but they're built into the network, into the neural net itself. So I'm just going to hit enter, shift enter on all of these, and just to load them up, because they sort of loaded up in series and kept hot, just as if you were in a Python shell. Is sort of the way to imagine it. This actually shows you the graph. I'm not sure what all of this means yet, but I do know that parts of these are different layers of the graph, so different node layers. There's a bunch of nodes that live at this layer that know a certain thing or have learned a certain thing while being trained in the run. And again, we loaded up that raw data, so we didn't have to do the actual neural net training. That was done by someone else. Now what happened here is it's actually loading up what appears to be like a flower image, sort of the flower layer, if you will. And we're just going to keep going, plugging through these. This sort of blows it out a little bit, makes it a little bit bigger. So it's actually rendering these in real time. It'll show some dots down here at the bottom whenever it is rendering something. And I'm just going through these. It's just loading up some examples, kind of laying out the basics of the network. So this is a function called a render lap norm, which we're now going to use to render a scene. And I have to click on that again, load it, and then it'll render it. So it loads up a default image at first, and now it's actually rendering the image. And once that's done, then I can go ahead and queue this up. And once this rendering is done with these flowers here, it's going to render this render it with lap norm down here. And this particular number is changeable, so you can change this to, I'm not sure what the range is, it's like 0 to like 255 or something like that. And so you can change it. See, this one looks sort of like buildings when it's doing the default render, which is kind of interesting. So 65 is buildings, but you can change this to something else, so we'll just make up something 34, see what 34 does. So this looks more maybe a little bit like reptiles or something. So the network, if you've ever seen Deep Dream, the video, it's like got dogs and fish and things like that it's been trained on. Maybe this looks like a dog nose down here or something like that. But this is just one layer of the network that it's sort of extracting and drawing, if you will. So it's querying that layer of the network and pulling out the imagery and then putting it into a blank format. So now we can kind of mix those together with by telling it to grab a couple different layers. So we used 34 and 101, I think. We want to do that sort of fish-looking thing with the weave. See what that does. Yeah, so that looks kind of interesting. So it's just kind of blending the two layers together, letting the two layers essentially interact with each other is sort of what's happening here. Alright, so that's interesting. So then what you can do, is kind of interesting, is you can do, you're going to define a function called render deep dream. This is going to emulate the deep dream algorithm, and then we can actually apply that to an image that's sitting on the server. In this case, it's going to, and these are previously cached, so these are like flowers, and I think that's probably what's going to render it as here, if we look at it. So this has got the animals. You can kind of see a little bit of a dog face here, detected in the hill. So what's interesting is you can upload an image to the server. So in order to connect to the server, you're going to go back to the VM instances, and then you're going to click on the SSH button, and then it's going to let you SSH into the server, and then at that point you can grab an image. And in this case, I have an image queued up here. Let me back out of Will. So I'm going to copy this. So copy image address. And then I'm going to go back into the server. Yeah, there I am. And I'm going to do a curl. Let's see, I'm going to do a sudo curl. And then that URL. And then I'm going to put that in temp will.jpg, And then I'm going to do a sudo move temp well. And then I'm going to move that into TensorFlow examples, tutorials, Deep Dream. And then I'm going to go back to the interface, and there I drew the image with the flowers there, which is kind of cool. And we're going to load up a different image. So we're going to load up Will. Alright, and then we're going to tell it to use that mixed 4C layer. So it's going to render that out. And then we're going to do, yeah, maybe, let's see here, we had this one. This one's kind of cool, so we'll do 34 on him. I think. Already you can tell it's getting kind of weird. And so we're going to do that right here, 34. And then that's going to fill in. So kind of interesting. Some kind of jacked Will up a little bit there, but you can kind of tell that it's running and picking up things. I did a image of the you know, food rack in the kitchen. Kind of did some interesting stuff with it, but anyway, you can tell it's kind of doing some funky stuff with these buttons here. Kind of cool. Anyway, I thought maybe it'd be interesting for people to play around with if you've never played around with it, and I always liked making it really simple to get things up and running that are sort of complicated. So anyway, if you have any questions, you know, give me a holler. I'm on Slack, usually in the office on Thursday and Friday, streaming with Michael Hun, and but I'll be in the office next week, Monday and Tuesday, so hit me up if you have any questions. Talk to you later. Cordless out.